Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. Yeah. Just Maharaj, I'm making you co-host, then you will be able to unmute. Just Hare Krishna Maharaj. Now you can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So today we are very fortunate and honored to have association of His Holiness H.D.Goswami Goswami Maharaj. I will just give a little brief introduction about Maharaj. In 1969, after attending a campus lecture delivered by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder Acharya of ISKCON, Maharaj began studying the philosophical literature of Srila Prabhupada movement. And in September 1969, Maharaj joined ISKCON Barclay Center. In 1970, he was formally initiated into Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition by Srila Prabhupada, and he did a lot of wonderful services in the mission of Srila Prabhupada. And around 1980s, together with the team, he formed and completed Prabhupada's epic translation and commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam Puran. Maharaj is fluent in 7 languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, German, and Sanskrit. Around 2013, Maharaj established Krishna West to help facilitate ISKCON's outreach to the Western audience. Krishna West now has centers throughout North and South America and Europe. Maharaj is a very senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada and lot of contribution in Prabhupada mission. So we are very fortunate to have Maharaj association. So we welcome Maharaj by chanting one time Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. So, should I begin?
Yes, Maharaj, you can.
First, thank you very much for this very kind invitation. It's an honor to be able to speak to all of you about great soul Bhakti Charu Swami. Among many very impressive activities and character traits of Bhakti Charu Swami, I should mention first that during my visit to Ujjain a few years ago, I was, I can say that I've been to many Hare Krishna temples, because that's what we do. We go to Hare Krishna temples if you're a sannyasi. But I don't think I can remember ever being received in a more gracious, kind, generous way than I was in Ujjain. And of course, as they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So I give, really, I give great credit not only to all of you for being such sincere souls and true Vaishnavas, but also, of course, Bhakti Charu Swami, who himself was a perfect gentleman. Prabhupada once was asked, how can you tell who's really a devotee? And Prabhupada said, he'll be a perfect gentleman. So certainly by that definition, Bhakti Charu Swami was an outstanding Vaishnava. And so the way he trained all of you, and the fact that he went to Ujjain and created this transcendental community with loving devotees who were so hospitable and kind and welcoming, and who displayed such ideal Vaishnava character, which of course is obviously to the credit of Bhakti Charu Swami. And so Prabhupada also once said, Krishna consciousness is not a bluff. And so it's not simply a question of diplomacy or, let's say, good manners, but of genuine loving Vaishnava feelings, which he embodied so much and which he was able to also bestow upon others. So, so I will always be grateful for the way I was treated in Ujjain. And also how I came to Ujjain is important. That also not only because as a sannyasi, I heard there was, free food there, but actually when I went to Ujjain, it was really because of Bhakti Charu Swami. And so I want to tell that story also. I went to Brazil several years ago, and I hadn't been there for several years. And so we had a big festival. We had about, it became sort of an all Latin America or South American festival. We had about 2,000 devotees, which in India is not necessarily a staggering number, but in the Western world, that's a lot of devotees. So we had 2,000 devotees that came for a festival in Brazil. It was very ecstatic, and we were also, of course, promoting Krishna West. And so then from Brazil, I flew to Florida, and I happened to go to Orlando, where Bhakti Charu Swami happened to be there. This was unplanned. Neither of us knew that the other would be there. And so, of course, we arranged to meet as old friends. And he was a GBC chairman that year. And when we met, of course, it was always a pleasure to meet Bhakti Charu Swami, as everyone says, because he was a very transcendental person, always very loving, always very generous. And when you meet with other people, there can be some formality or some level of conditioned consciousness or false ego, and so people can, be very polite and very kind and say the right things, but you can perceive there's still a little bit of conditioning. But in the case of Bhakti Charu Swami, it was always, as everyone knows this, it was such a pleasure to be with him because he was just so completely loving and kind. And I mean, he really had a great love for other souls, which of course means that he had great love for Krishna and for Prabhupada. So we met and we talked, and of course, the usual jokes. It was impossible for us to meet and not, go through our usual old jokes between each other. I mean, with each other. So I remember going back, how many years? Probably 40 years or so. Some of our jokes go back 40 years. Because I was always kind of more Western in my outlook. I mean, in terms of, because Prabhupada ordered me in that way. I received direct orders from Prabhupada to make Krishna consciousness attractive to educated Western people. And of course, Bhakti Charu Swami, which I'll talk about more later, was Prabhupada's most prominent Gaudiya disciple. So we would joke, and I would call, because he was more traditional, I would call him his initials, BC. And I would say, you're very, very ancient. So he would call me, from Acharya, they would call me AD, and always say, oh, you're too modern. Of course, this was all said in joking, and we would always laugh about this. So I met him in Orlando, and at that time, without going into all the details, the relationship between my project and some of the leaders of ISKCON and GBC was not the best. I won't go into all that. But Bhakti Charu Swami, as the GBC chairman that year, he took very seriously that responsibility, and because he really does have great love for Prabhupada, because he always was fully dedicated to Prabhupada just fully dedicated to Prabhupada. So he took very seriously his personal responsibility as the GBC chairman, that he wanted, because he knew that I was, the other leaders are trying to do their best for Prabhupada. He knew very well, he knew me, that, I'm following actually Prabhupada's instructions to me and trying to do what I know Prabhupada needs me to do. And so he he took personal responsibility as GBC chairman. He had to fix this. And he took that very seriously, that Krishna has put me in this position this year as GBC chairman, and I have to fix this, or I have to do everything possible to bring the devotees together. And so we were talking, and he said a few things, and I gave my standard answers. And then he just spontaneously said, it must have been Krishna. He just spontaneously said to me without any preparation or introduction or preface, he just said to me, you have to be on the GVC. You should be back on the GVC. And I said, really? Or something like that. And so he, anyway, he was quite insistent. He was quite convinced. And we talked a little bit, and I thought, he's right, actually. Again, I won't go into all the history. I'll leave that to political historians. But he insisted on this point, that this is the solution. This is the way to bring everyone back together. And so I agreed that if that's Krishna's desire, and if that actually happened. So then, as it turned out, the next GBC meeting was in Ujjain. And so to me, it's obvious that, as he did many times, Krishna spoke through Bhakti Charu Swami, that when he told me that, I'm sure it was Krishna speaking through him. And of course, I think there was no better host in the history of ISKCON in terms of receiving Vaishnavas. And so he, of course, he made an offer I couldn't refuse, as they say, in terms of telling me, how nicely I would be received, and I'll be happy there. And whatever happens at the GVC level, I'll have a great time, being hosted in Ujjain. And so anyway, he told me all these things so sincerely and so lovingly that in my heart, I knew that I have to do this, that somehow Krishna has put him as the GVC chairman. We were old friends, and he's invited me and urged me with so much real devotion and such a pure desire to do what is best for Prabhupada and his mission, that I realized that and so I did the impossible. I actually got on a plane and flew all the way there, because flying on airplanes is not my favorite devotional service. And many times in the past, when I go to Mayapur, Vrindavan, I got very sick. And so if you go somewhere, and of course, I've had my most wonderful spiritual experiences in my life in places like Vrindavan and Mayapur. So I'm very much aware by personal experience that it's a spiritual world. But Prabhupada always wanted me to preach in the West. One time in 1972, in those days, there was no annual Mayapur meeting at the GBC. There was no Mayapur, ISKCON. And so Prabhupada, whenever he needed the GBC, he would just call them to wherever Prabhupada was, and they would all fly in, and they would have a meeting. And so in 1972, in May, I was about to take sannyas, along with several other devotees, in Los Angeles. And so Prabhupada called all the GBC, and they took advantage of this meeting, because they didn't meet regularly, to sort of redo the map of ISKCON, all the zones, and Bhagavan went to Europe, and just all kinds of adjustments were made in GBC zones. And the GBC voted, the whole GBC voted, I think unanimously, that because I knew some Sanskrit, and I should go preach in India. And when Prabhupada, so the system was always, when Prabhupada was there, that after every session of the GBC, morning session or afternoon session, the devotees, the GBC would go to Prabhupada's room and read all the resolutions, and Prabhupada would just say yes, no, or redo it. And so when they read that resolution that I should go to India, Prabhupada said, "What? Why will he go to India? His service is not in India. Let him stay and preach in America." And so I had many experiences like this with Prabhupada. So, and so Krishna kind of emphasized the point by blessing me with the ecstatic experience of, almost dying in India several times, including one time that Prabhupada actually saved my life. I got food poisoning from a chocolate cake that a very good friend of mine, Amarendra, had brought from Florida. And on the way, it wasn't refrigerated. So I was literally lying there on the balcony in Mayapur. I mean, there's a whole story of how I collapsed on the bank of the Jalangi, and I was carried back, and I was just sitting there with food poisoning. And so they asked me, what do you, some people, it was like a Jamila with the Vishnu Dutas and Yama Dutas. So I woke up and there was an argument going on, and some people want to take me to the hospital in Krishnanagar. Another devotee said, "No, he'll die there. It's it's worse than anything to go to that hospital in Krishnanagar." So they looked down at me and said, "What do you want to do?" And I just, all the energy I had, I just said, "Ask Prabhupada," because we were right next to Prabhupada's room. So they went and asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, he doesn't have to go to the hospital. Just give him some water mixed with tulsi leaves." So they gave that to me, and literally I drank it like in 5 minutes. I was walking around chanting japa. So Prabhupada actually saved me physically. Anyway, so I was not always so enthusiastic, even though I love India, and I know there are many places there that are actually the spiritual world. And some reluctance, but for Bhakti Charu Swami, I couldn't refuse him because I knew that Krishna was speaking through him. And so I went there, and we had quite a lively session of the GBC, and I made my points, and the result was that the GBC unanimously accepted Bhakti Charu Swami's proposal. So I think that what Bhakti Charu Swami did, among many things that he did, it was of great historical importance. And of course, many things he did were of great historical, but this in my own life, and I think really for all of ISKCON, because I think that Bhakti Charu Swami did what in a sense no one else could do, including myself and the other members of the GBC. And that is by his extraordinary Krishna consciousness, love for the Vaishnavas, and of course love of Prabhupada, and his complete dedication to Prabhupada's vision of a unified movement. He somehow or other arranged to bring us all together. And if you study the history of religions, which I've done quite a bit, something like Krishna West, and again, I've never claimed to know what people in other parts of the world should do to spread Krishna consciousness. But at least in the Western world, something like Krishna West, if you study history, has made the difference between a new religious movement becoming a world religion or not. I mean, just to give one quick little fact, and this is very true. I mean, I'm stating a very simple, almost, it may sound almost funny, but if you study all the technical history, it's actually true. The reason that Christianity became a world religion and not just sort of a failing, which it was, a failing little project where the leaders of the movement, their GBC, whom they called apostles, they literally were almost starving. They could hardly feed themselves. The movement was doing so badly. And then figure of Paul did something like Jesus West. Like I said, that may sound amusing, but that's exactly what it was. It was Jesus West. And of course, we won't make all the mistakes he made. But so Bhakti Charu Swami, he had this pure spiritual vision. And so the fact that he brought us all together, that he did what no one else can do, including myself, not only is a tribute to his love for Prabhupada and the Vaishnavas, he played a very key, essential his role in ISKCON history, just by that one act, and not to speak of all the other things he did. So Anyway, I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to speak here. I don't want to.
You can speak, Maharaj, till 8:30 we have, but even after that we can continue, no problem.
Okay, I won't charge you extra considering this. So, so that is another sense. Bhakti Charu Swami, because of his outstanding Vaishnav character, he made Krishna consciousness scientific. This may sound unusual because he's not known to be a scientist, but he was a spiritual scientist. And the essence of science is not that you just foolishly think the ultimate truth is in matter. That's not the essence of science. The essence of science is that you have a theory and a proof that you come up, you propose that something is the truth, and then you actually demonstrate that it's true. And Krishna actually talks about this in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3 and chapter 5. He uses the ancient Sanskrit terminology Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya means, and also chapter 2 actually, something like philosophy. Something like, because the word in kya in Sanskrit, you all know this, I'm sure, from India, but kya in Sanskrit means to explain something or to narrate something. And sang means together, like sankirtan. So sankhya literally means to give a sort of a complete explanation of things. And therefore the word, and sankhya also in Sanskrit means number. And so without going into all the links between those two meanings, but it means number, to sort of give an account. I mean, think of in English, you have to count, like sankhya, numbers, but then you have an account, to give an account of something, which means to explain it. And so I think if you look at the English count and to give an account, to account for something, which means to explain it, then that's something like the word sankhya. And so then from the word sankhya, you have the derivative word sankhya, which means to basically enumerate or to explain all the fundamental principles of reality. And of course, there's a word in Sanskrit which means a fundamental principle, a fundamental category of reality, which is the word tattva. Just very briefly, tat, of course, is also in English. If you add an H, it's English, that. So tat, and then twa means ness, or like the state of being. So tattva means the state of being that. Since that is a demonstrative pronoun, in Sanskrit philosophical shorthand, it refers to a real thing, because you can only demonstrate something which actually exists. So this is very brilliant culture, this Vedic culture. And so the word tattva means being a demonstrable thing, a real thing, a fundamental object. And so therefore we say Vishnu tattva, Jiva tattva, and so on. So anyway, getting back to the point, so Sankhya therefore ultimately means to give a full philosophical account of reality, especially giving the tattvas, the enumerating the fundamental principles of reality. And then yoga, of course, means application, spiritual process, the sort of acting on this philosophy. So Krishna says, Sankhya Yoga Pratak Bala Pravadanti. That Bala was, Bala means child, like Bala Krishna. So Bala, Krishna here means like childish people, those who are childish, those who are immature. So Krishna says, Sankhya Yoga Pratak Bala Pravadanti Napanjat, that the childish say that philosophy and practice are different, not the wise. And ekamapi asti tak samyag hubayor vindate phalam. And if one really sticks to one of these, that one achieves the fruit of both. And of course, in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 39, which is the summary of all the contents, where Krishna says, Esha te bihita sankhye I've now, Buddhi Yogeti Mangshuna, I've now explained to you Buddhi, or a rational account of reality. I've now explained it to you in terms of the philosophy, Sankhya, and now hear about it in practice, Yoga. So Bhakti Charu Swami really demonstrated the spiritual science because he acted in a way that corresponds to Krishna's teachings. After all, Prabhupada always, this was one of Prabhupada's big selling points when he would preach, is that the people who chant Hare Krishna, those who are following me, they are demonstrating superior character. They're giving up sinful activities. They're actually devoting themselves to God and so on. And as we know, as time went on and ISKCON became a larger religion, we can't exactly say that everyone that chants Hare Krishna is demonstrating great character. Unfortunately, we can't really say that. And yet Bhakti Charu Swami did. So Bhakti Charu Swami actually understood Prabhupada's teachings, which are Lord Chaitanya's teachings, which are Krishna's teachings. So Bhakti Charu Swami actually understood that. But then his yoga, his spiritual practice of it, his application of those teachings demonstrated that this is real spiritual science. And so it's actually the great Vaishnavas, it's actually the Vaishnavas who, by their own character, give transparently, show a living example of what Krishna is teaching, of how one actually benefits by bhakti yoga, and how one can revive the pure nature of the soul. So by living a pure life, completely devoted to Prabhupada's mission, Bhakti Charu Swami actually demonstrated that this is a spiritual science. And one who does that, of course, there's a word for it, acharya. Of course, that's a very sensitive topic, the word acharya. But actually, Prabhupada said, who fortunately had a lot more common sense than many of us, Prabhupada said that he wanted all of his disciples, actually men and women, to be acharyas, because the word char in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit root char, means to act. Like a person's actions are called, therefore, charita, like Chaitanya Charita Amrita. And so chara, from that verb, means conduct, achara, conduct in the sense of good conduct. It's just like, for example, in English, a mother may say to her child, behave yourself. So the child technically could say, well, everything I'm doing technically is behavior. But when a mother tells her child, you have to behave, it means you have to behave properly. And so it's actually just like that in Sanskrit, that achara just means behavior, but it means good behavior. And acharya, anyway, without going into all the grammar here, but acharya means one whose behavior is to be followed. That it's the behavior that you should perform. It's the way you should behave, or one who behaves in the proper way, the way that people should behave. And so Prabhupada wanted us all to be acharyas, because I always say acharya with a small a, not a capital A, because acharya with a capital A, that's Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta and so on. But Prabhupada did say that, because if the leaders of ISKCON are not acharyas, the alternative is hypocrisy. And so thank God we have people like Bhakti Charu Swami who were acharyas, who actually exhibited proper behavior and therefore proved that Krishna consciousness is a real science. So yes, just to wrap up, I very much relish the memories I have. One time the Bhakti Charu Swami, one of the few times that we actually worked together on an actual team, apart from GBC meetings, which are an interesting ecstatic thing. But I remember in 1975, no, 76, 70, maybe 77, I'm sorry, 86 or 87, not 70s, 86 or 87. The GBC, including myself and Bhakti Charu Swami, we had to deal with a real problem that ISKCON had never had before. And I hope we never have again. And that is because we had the initial guru system in ISKCON, and it's very interesting in retrospect. Just a word on that. Prabhupada had a concept of what a leader should be, in a sense, based on his own experience. Because if you look at, Krishna says, of course, in the Gita, Chatur Varnya Maya system, that I created the system of 4 Varnas. And in that system, Krishna clearly separates the 2 highest functions, which are sort of the teachers who tell the society from their childhood, who tell that society what is right and wrong, what is proper behavior, what you should do and not do. Pravritting cha, nivritting cha, karya karye, and so on. And so that's obviously very important. Children are very impressionable. And of course, in traditional societies, up until the whole sort of secularization movement, that really, I mean, secular society as we know it is really only about 150 years old. And for the rest of human history, society was non-secular. And so, therefore, the teachers were also the religious people, because when you're teaching, you have to teach the highest knowledge, or even if you're teaching lower knowledge, it has to be taught within an ethical framework. Like if you're becoming a scientist, you have to know, that you shouldn't use science to commit genocide. So science, even science, not to speak of history and philosophy, it has to go on within an ethical framework. And ethics are metaphysical, and therefore they have to have a metaphysical base, which means theology. And anyway, just not going into all the details. So for 99% of the time that human beings have been alive on earth, knowledge, or maybe 95% knowledge, has been taught by religious leaders. And so therefore, that's the natural system. The modern system, which is failing, the universities are actually, I won't go into all the socio-historical reality nowadays, but this great experiment of having purely secular philosophy and knowledge is not working. Society's kind of unraveling, as we see. So therefore, the Brahmins are very important. In a traditional sane society, spiritual leaders are very important. They're the natural teachers. And the Kshatriyas, who actually govern society. So Prabhupada emphasized these, and that's why if you look at the Bhagavatam, with the of course fantastic exception of the residents of Vrindavan, who are the greatest devotees of Krishna, apart from the residents of Vrindavan, virtually all of the important people in the Bhagavatam are either Brahmins or Kshatriyas. And so Krishna separates these classes. There is a balance of power, you could say. And if you study Mahabharata, there are moments when there was a tension between these 2 classes, leading to even, one class killing the other class. Parashuram is one example, and then the case of Aurva is another, where Kshatriyas killed Brahmins. So this, of course, was exceptional, but there was a tension. But these 2 powers were separated. Now, what's interesting is in ISKCON, these powers are not separated. And of course, that, and the obvious reason is that when Prabhupada came, being the charismatic founder of a new religious movement, I'm using the word charismatic. I don't mean charismatic like, the Beatles or something. or Elvis Presley. I mean charismatic in the ancient Greek sense, which is the way sociologists use it. Charismatic, charisma, to have charisma is very much like what we call Shakti Avesh. Shakti Avesh, that someone receives special power from God. And so, if you know the sociology of religion, in the first stage of a new religious movement, you have a charismatic leader, a leader like Prabhupada, who is perceived by the followers to have a special power given by God, and that God is speaking through this person. And so, therefore, all authority comes from this person. And all authority comes from this person. And that was the case with Prabhupada. Prabhupada had to manage ISKCON. He had to teach us even how to clean ourselves properly. He had to teach us, how to manage our temples. And he was also, of course, the great theologian, he revealed the message of God. So Prabhupada had this model. One time I wrote to Prabhupada, Satsrup also, we were traveling together with Satsrup Maharaj, we both wrote to Prabhupada saying, okay, we just took sannyas, Prabhupada, there's 72, now no more management, because we've both been temple presidents, now we can just preach. And Prabhupada wrote back and said, who told you this nonsense? One time, I'm just going to close this door, there's a little noise outside. Prabhupada wrote back and said, who told you this nonsense? He said, you do what I'm doing. In the morning, I give Bhagavatam class, and in the afternoon, I go to the bank. So what's interesting is that Prabhupada had this image that he wanted his sons, go into the family business. And so when Prabhupada chose 11 people to be Diksha gurus, when he left, what's very interesting is that all 11 of them were managers and preachers, of course, and also preachers. But Prabhupada didn't choose one person to be a guru who was just a Brahmin, who was just, let's say, learned in Shastra, a good preacher. Everyone he chose was also managing a zone. He actually chose the people who were leading zones. And so, of course, ultimately, as time goes on and as actually social science predicts, it created a lot of problems because you had a lot of the people who had sort of a managerial propensity, and they didn't make it as gurus for various reasons. But so anyway, so Bhakti Charu Swami, I think, also was one of the, so I know what I was going to say. So the reason we worked together is because so many gurus had fallen down, and it became a real crisis. It was like a major crisis because we had hundreds and hundreds of ISKCON devotees without gurus, hundreds of them. And of course, Bhakti Charu Swami, myself, and others were trying to comfort and encourage these people, but you had just hundreds and hundreds of devotees whose gurus had fallen down. And so the biggest question in ISKCON at that time was, do these people have to get reinitiated or not get reinitiated? And so that was the big question in ISKCON. So the GVC decided we have to research and write a paper. So Bhakti Charu Swami and I worked together because we were the translation committee. So Bhakti Charu Swami translated Bengali, I did the Sanskrit, so we worked together. And that was a very happy time. He was a very easy person to work with. I mean, because when you work with other big leaders, that's not always true. But with Bhakti Charu Swami, it was a real pleasure. I just somehow or other, not that it was a nice situation to be in with all these suffering disciples, but it was a real pleasure to work with him. We were Mayapurs during the GVC meeting, and we spent hours and hours together going over translations. And it was very nice because that time I spent with Bhakti Charu Swami was very Brahminical. We were just translating, and of course we had to sometimes derive philosophical conclusions, and what does this acharya mean by that, and what does this actually mean? But I just remember that's a very, very happy memory for me. Just that time I spent with him in Mayapur for days. We worked for days just going through Shastras, and it was a very happy time. I remember another time in New Delhi, That was before ISKCON owned a temple. And after this, then we'll take your questions. That was, I think, in 1981, I think it was. 1981. And so the temple president in Delhi, who was a Western devotee, very kindly gave me his apartment to stay in. ISKCON didn't own the temple back then. They were renting a house. And so Bhakti Charu Swami came and stayed with me, which I was very happy about. And we just spent days together singing Bengali songs like Parama Karuna and Nitai Gunamani Amar. And of course, he would translate them because he knew Bengali. And that was just a very ecstatic time. It had nothing to do with ISKCON management or anything. We were just singing Bengali songs together. So those were very, it was a very loving relationship. There's things that they're some of my happiest memories in terms of association with senior godbrothers. So thank you very much again for this opportunity to speak about Swami. And that must be a descendant of Sivananda Sen's dog. Anyway, so let me see if there are any questions here. Are there any questions?
Yes, Maharaj, there are a few questions. I will just...
Okay, I can read it here. So this might be a personal question, but with Guru Maharaj's absence, are you concerned about the relationship Krishna West will have with the GBC in the future? I don't think so. I mean, we're also behaving nicely. And so I think everyone's on their best behavior. And also, to be perfectly honest, I think Krishna West, to use the medical term, really within the ISKCON body has become inoperable, in the sense that, there's just so many devotees, thousands of devotees, either directly participating or strongly supporting that. And also, in fact, now we've gone to another level of discussing with the GVC whether we should do something that Prabhupada actually recommended. He said that we should study the Catholic Church in terms of how they organize. I mean, not for theology, I hope, but how they've organized, because they have orders, and that's the way they've really dealt with unity and diversity, is that to relieve any like stress, because like people have different ways of doing things inevitably. In fact, Prabhupada said the whole purpose of ISKCON is to train devotees to think independently, of course, within boundaries. So the idea of having a Krishna West order. And also, but the real point is that if you study Prabhupada's teachings, you will find many places where Prabhupada says, don't change anything. That's your disease, you want to change things. And you will find many places where Prabhupada says you have to adjust everything. In for example, in his purport to the Bhagavatam, verse 4.854, where Narada Muni instructs Dhruva Maharaj that you have to worship the Lord Deshakala Vibhagavit, knowing the differences, Vibhaga, the distinctions of Deshakala, place and time. And when Bhishma Dev in the first canto, I think it's 1.9.11 or something, when he's on the bed of arrows, he's praised. Bhishma is praised as being Deshakala Vibhagavit. Same thing. One who knows the distinctions of place and time. And in both purports to those two verses, Prabhupada emphasizes, for example, at 4.854, he says that if one is really to serve, he said one must make all adjustments and take all risk and make all adjustments so that Western people are comfortable with Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada even says that there are some people, he says, devotees, this is Prabhupada's words, don't kill the messenger. Prabhupada said that there are certain devotees puffed up with concocted notions, direct quote, puffed up with concocted notions, who think that in the West you can do everything the same way as in India. So Prabhupada says don't change anything. Prabhupada says adjust everything. So how do you reconcile, how do you explain this paradox? Paradox, of course, is an apparent contradiction, which upon further investigation turns out to be not a contradiction. And the obvious explanation is given by Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada in the 6th chapter of Nectar Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Rupa Goswami and Prabhupada say that there are 2 categories of principles that we follow. There are fundamental principles that you cannot change, and there are details which you have to change. You know, whether, as I always say, whether you are a very large prehistoric mammal or a religious movement, you will go extinct if you don't adapt to your environment. And so, so how do you know what are the fundamental principles? Well, first of all, 2 ways. Number 1, because Rupa Goswami lists them. But number 2, if you study Prabhupada's teachings, there are 3 things that we can't change. There are 3 things that we can never change. One is our philosophy. Our philosophy. And of course, you have to understand Siddhanta as opposed to details. We can't change our philosophy. Number 2 is we can't change our sadhana, our basic practice. And number 3 is we should not betray Prabhupada's mission. Prabhupada wanted us to serve within his institution for obvious historical reasons, because otherwise we won't come to anything if we divide ourselves. So in Krishna West, we very strictly follow Prabhupada's teachings. We are faithful members of ISKCON, and we have the same sadhana. We chant 16 rounds, we follow the 4 principles. We eat too much on Sunday, you know, all the basics. And so we're following all the basic principles of ISKCON. We are faithful to ISKCON, and we're repeating Prabhupada's philosophy. Let's see quickly. What is Krishna West, Maharaj, and how is it different from ISKCON? It's not different from ISKCON. It is ISKCON. It just shows it's just another way of it's Prabhupada. Any movement, in order to survive and prosper, it has to do and be faithful to its tradition. It has to accomplish 2 tasks. It has to preserve everything that is fundamental in the tradition, and it must adapt to changing times. It must successfully do both things. And so Prabhupada gave us many instructions on how to do both those things. Prabhupada actually explained in detail how to do that, how to preserve what is fundamental, and how to adjust what needs to be adjusted. I mean, this is true for religious movement. It's true for if you're a computer manufacturer. It's true for everything in life. It's true for personal relationships. It's beta. And so, so we are very faithfully following that. And so, unfortunately, well, let me put this positively and be really a nice guy here. There is a danger of in one's effort to keep Prabhupada in the center, filtering Prabhupada and just keeping half of Prabhupada in the center. Prabhupada has a very conservative side because he was absolutely unyielding in his insistence on preserving the fundamental aspects of Krishna consciousness. He was adamant. He could not have been more clear about preserving what is fundamental. At the same time, he was also very adamant that we have to adjust. And so if we only adapt and adjust and don't preserve, we just deviate and we lose the real Hare Krishna movement. If we only preserve and don't adapt, number one, we're not following Vaishnava history because all the acharyas adapted. I won't go into all the details, but I mean, that's real history, which can be documented very easily, including Krishna, including Lord Chaitanya, and all the acharyas adapted to the times they were in. If you just look at the difference between Krishna Leela and Chaitanya Leela, you will see a massive adaptation to a different age in every feature of life externally. So I think we are preserving the real Prabhupada, the complete Prabhupada, by strongly following both principles, preservation of the basic principles, adaptation of the details. That combination is actually Vaishnava history, and that's really Prabhupada. So so that's another point. Just 1 second. How can we assist in helping Krishna? I visited you at your apartment last year with Guru Maharaj. He made lasagna for you, for which I'm eternally grateful, actually. It was a great lasagna. Yeah. Bhakti Charu Swami was, he's a very intelligent, realized Vaishnava. And he understood all these things. How can you help? Stationed in LA as well. Write to me, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I'm reading Canto 11 and find purports too philosophical and difficult to understand. Can you please guide how I can read and understand it nicely? Well, if you have a specific question, please write to me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Bhakti Prema Swami is here in the Zoom room. So I saw him. Actually, Bhakti Prema Swami, I've been watching you.
Yes, Maharaj.
So I was happy to see you there. And I've actually, I definitely noticed you. I've been watching you this whole time. So I don't know if you would like to say a few words.
Maharaj, the way Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's glory is increasing and associates glory also increasing. And the same way Prabhupada's glory will increase and Prabhupada's eternal associate, your glory, will also increase. I am so fortunate when I came Ujjain, you allow me to serve you personally. I am indebted to you. And I will request you, Guru Maharaj is not here, that is why you should come more and more to give us association. That is my humble request.
Thank you very much. That's a very...
And also, this type of class, if you don't mind, if you give, I think everybody will be very happy.
It would be an honor to go to Ujjain. And I'm just finishing up some books, which I hope will make a difference in ISKCON, help. And so I'm very grateful for your kind invitation, and I owe you a visit.
Maharaj, it is your temple. Why I should invite you?
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Maharaj. Please accept us as your nephew, and please forgive all our offenses.
I don't think you could commit an offense even if you tried. So, but Hare Krishna, thank you very much. And I should go there. In my heart, So I think I'll be traveling more once this once this pandemic is over.
Yes, Maharaj. Not now. When is over that?
But yes, actually, because I'm working on Mahabharata in a very special way, and which I think devotees will be. It's something very new for them. But and of course, Bharat Varsha. I can tell you one time that the first time I went to India in this lifetime, we flew. I mean, everyone was flying together. I mean, ISKCON was kind of small, and 90% of the devotees going to the first Mayapur festival were on the same airplane. And so when we, of course, I'm a real geographer and historian. So as we were coming into India, of course, I had my face against the window. I was watching everything, and I could just figure out from the geography, the topography, that at a certain point we were actually in Bharat Varsha. We'd entered into Bharat Varsha, and I could feel it. And I looked down through the plane window, and I could just as I say, my mind's eye, I could just almost see the Pandavas down there performing their pastimes with Krishna. And so now I'm actually working on Mahabharata. So yes, and you can, and I'd be very happy if you and I can go together and visit some of these places from Mahabharata.
Maharaj. And also, please engage me in your service.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll go to the other question. Let's see. Oh yes, I answered. Let's see. If I skipped one, please tell me, because I don't want to trying to. Let's see. Srila Bhakti Charu Swami is so affable, accommodating, and comforting with his majestic yet motherly aura. I can feel Maharaj's Dhira Jana Priya kind of hope-giving presence in my heart. As preachers, I tend to be result-oriented in planning and in controlling mode. How is it possible to imbibe that personal, affectionate touch that Maharaj exemplified so much? And that's from Rahul Ranjan Misha. It's a very interesting question.
Prabhu, क्या हो रहा है internet?
Huh? I'm sorry, what was that?
No, it's okay. Okay, Maharaj, sound is okay.
Okay. A very interesting question. It's a very thoughtful question. There's a time, I mean, even Bhakti Charu Swami, when the situation called for strength, he could be, as we know, be very strong. And there are different jobs that need to be done. Of course, I mean, we should all aspire to have that loving nature that Bhakti Charu Swami so much exemplified. It's something we should all aspire to, because it's really Krishna conscious. But I think sometimes we have to, as Prabhupada said, the secret of Krishna consciousness is whatever nature we have, there's a devotional service for it. And that's the beauty of Krishna's system. Everyone is included, everyone can serve. I myself sometimes am not exactly motherly, as some of my people who work with me know that very well. But yes, if we follow someone, I mean, if you follow Bhakti Charu Swami and very sincerely try to serve his mission, then his blessings will be there, and we will develop all good qualities. So, Srila Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj was so, that's the same thing. Oh, I see, it came in twice. So, last question. Can you elaborate more about your work in the Mahabharata? Maybe I'll end with this, because I have actually another program. And that is, for example, those of you who are alive right now, those of you who are living today, I mean, all of us, there's a certain historical context. For example, if you're alive today, you know about Indian independence, you know, let's say, about the Cold War, you know about just the whole geopolitical situation, you know about World War II and World War I, you know about how the British came to India, about the Raj. There are things that we just know. They're just part of the, and you can't really understand India today unless you know about the British East India Trading Company and the British Raj, or even the Mughal Empire. I mean, how could you understand India, whether it's architecture, customs, or why there are so many, Arabic words in Urdu and so on. I mean, just to, Indian art and music. So, I mean, simple question, you have to know, plus you have to so without knowing Indian history, even let's say in the last several centuries, you could never begin to understand the reality of India today. And that's not just India in the last few centuries, all of history is like that. So my vision is that you have to go back at 4 generations, and I'll tell you why 4 generations. in order to really enter into it, to experience the Mahabharata, not watching it, not looking at it, but to actually see it through the eyes of the people who are living it. So you are actually living in the world they lived in, and you are seeing what they saw and reacting to it the way they reacted. And so the Mahabharata is so big. The Mahabharata is so big that even 5,000 years ago, there were like smaller versions of it. This idea of having an abridged Mahabharata, that began 5,000 years ago. And so it's very famous that the Mahabharata itself talks about abridged versions. About, there are very short versions and bigger versions and bigger versions. And so because there's so much material the question arose, even 5,000 years ago, the question arose, where do you start? Because the Mahabharata begins with the creation of the universe. The Mahabharata basically it's a cosmic history which sort of comes into focus about 5,000 years ago. So where do you start? So the Mahabharata itself says that many sages like to start the story. They prefer their narration because there's no evidence of writing in India back there. There's an oral tradition. So many sages begin their narration of it with the story of Uparichara Vasu, who his name literally means upwardly mobile Vasu, Uparichara. So why? Because with Vasu, he's the first person whose activities directly impact in a very strong way everything that comes afterwards. Because Vasu's daughter is, of course, Satyavati. His grandson is Vyasadeva. His grandson through his eldest son, Brihadrata, is Jarasandha. You may not have thought of it, but Jarasandha was actually the biggest asura 5,000 years ago. We think of Kamsa just because of Krishna Leela, Vrindavan Leela is so popular, but actually geopolitically, the major asura was Jarasandha. And Kamsa was actually under Jarasandha's protection and married Jarasandha's two daughters to forge the alliance. So Jarasandha is the first cousin of Vyasadeva. And he's the nephew of Satyavati. And so everything is interlinked. And so Vasu is very important. So I'm going to explain, because what I've done is I've studied the map of India, of course. For example, where did Satyavati live, actually? And we can pinpoint that to some extent, even though we don't really get the name even of her village, but there's a way. I'm sort of doing historical reconstruction. And because we have two clues. Number one, she lived in Chedi, and that's another thing. Why was the imperial capital transferred to Chedi from Hastinapur? Because it was. At the time of Vasu, the Mahabharata says over and over and over again that King Vasu, Parichara Vasu, who was the king of Chedi, Lord Indra personally sent him to Chedi, and the capital, of course, is Shuktimati, which means Pearl River. And so he was sent to Chedi, and the Mahabharata says repeatedly, he was the emperor, he was Raja, Raja, he was Samrat, he was the emperor. Why was the capital taken away from Hastinapur? And why did it go back to Hastinapur in the next generation when Shantanu became king? So you have to study, anyway. So if you look at the map of India, we know that Satyavati, as a girl, was living in the Chedi kingdom because her father was Vasu. But another thing, she was sent away to a fishing village. Why? Not just because she had, really, really serious case of body odor, but one thing is I should mention here, Madhvacharya, who's not too far from Ujjain, Madhvacharya wrote a book on Mahabharata in which he said the text has been corrupted over time, thoroughly corrupted. This is Madhvacharya, don't blame me. This is not my fault. So why would a great king who's a pure devotee, Charu, send his own daughter away? And if she's a princess, why would he send her to a low class? I mean, fishing villages were not really higher class back then than they are now in India. You know, fishing village, with all due respect to all of Yancy, is a fishing village. And so why send your own daughter, your only daughter, to a fishing village? And there are the reasons for all this. Anyway, but so if you look at the map, Satyavati was in Chedi, but she was on the Jamuna River. Now, if you study the ancient geography of India, there is only a very small area where the Jamuna River flows through ancient Chedi. And so we can actually pinpoint that. Now, there's another fact that you have to study ancient Indian geography. We also know where Hastinapur was, roughly. It's, roughly around Meerut in India. And so the question is, we know from Mahabharata that Shantanu was wandering around and he somehow, just ran in and bumped into this incredibly beautiful young girl and named Satyavati and wanted to marry her. Now, first of all, great emperors like Shantanu don't marry fishing girls. But anyway, the real question here is, what was Shantanu doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away from his own kingdom? It's just like in India today, Modi ji. He doesn't just say, hey, I think I'll just go on vacation in, Thailand or something. You don't do that and just sort of wander around. The leaders of states, great leaders, don't just go walking around other places. And if he ran into Satyavati, it means he wasn't in another royal capital, it wasn't a state visit. He was just wandering through the woods because it's a very remote location. Satyavati lived in a very remote. So what was he doing there? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles away from his own kingdom with no army. And so you have to figure, what was he doing there? And why did he marry Satyavati? And what was the political effect? What was the geopolitical consequence of the greatest king in the world at that time, Shantanu, marrying the only daughter of the emperor? Because her father had been emperor of the world. So what's going on geopolitically? And there's all kinds of things involved. So suffice it to say, you have to read. My goal is, if I can get Krishna's mercy to do this, and I think he's given me this mercy, is to really take you back in a serious history, like from the point of view of serious historiography. What's really going on? Why did people do the things they did? Just to give one example, maybe I'll end it with that we know the famous story. Abhimanyu was killed, and then Arjuna was outraged, of course, and he went after Jayadratha. But now the question is, why would he just do that? And we all know that Jayadratha cashed in his boon from Lord Shiva so that he could keep the Pandavas out of the Vyuha, out of this military formation. But the obvious fact is that Jayadratha was just, he was just a co-conspirator. What about the people that actually killed Abhimanyu? Arjuna is not at all angry at them, like, hey guys, can't stay to talk right now, I got to go get Jayadratha. So if you actually read the unabridged Mahabharata, Arjuna is not depicted as having the slightest trace of anger toward the people that actually killed his son. So what is really going on? Or how did the Pandavas get to Virat, the kingdom of Virat? How did the Pandavas get to the kingdom of Virat? Because they were living in the forest for 12 years, whatever it was, for 13 years, and everyone knew where they were. They were actually receiving heads of state. Other kings were coming, great sages. They were literally holding court in the forest. If you read the Mahabharata, everyone on earth knew exactly where the Pandavas were at every moment. So how do you get from where they were to Virat? How do you actually get there without anyone knowing? Because if you read Mahabharata or Bhagavatam, it's very, very spy intensive. They have spies everywhere. I mean, just like now, there's all these intelligence services. They had that back then. They had huge networks of espionage spies. They were all doing that. And so all you had to do, because it said in the Mahabharata that the Pandavas, when they were on their way to Virata, they gave away their horses and chariots and just walked to Virat. So how do you walk from point A to point B and no one sees you? How could they go into, because everyone knew where they were. How do you just walk? You know, it takes a few weeks to get to Virat, or a month or so, and no one knows where you're going? And then how do you get to Virat and the king doesn't know who you are? Because King Virat of Virat actually knew the Pandavas, because King Virat was present at the Rajasuya sacrifice. He knows them. And so what's really going on here? Then you have to plug something else. You have to put another fact in here, and that is that Satyavati is very attached to the Pandavas, and the kingdom of Virat is not an ancient kingdom at the time of Mahabharata. It's actually a new kingdom, which was founded recently. It's all stated in the Mahabharata. You have to read very carefully. And who founded the kingdom of Virat a couple of generations before the Pandavas? The eldest brother of Satyavati, the twin brother of Satyavati. Satyavati had a twin brother whose name is Matsya. And that's why Virat was also called Matsya Desh, because he founded it. And as we know from science, there is very often a very special relationship between twins. Twins, twin siblings tend to have a very special relationship. And the Pandavas go for shelter to a place that was founded by Satyavati's closest brother. There's another fact you have to plug in. I'm just giving one example of how you have to really be able to act as a serious historian. Here's another fact. King Virat was not actually in charge of his kingdom. Because if you read the Virat Parva, if you read what actually went on when the Pandavas went there, it's clear that the power had been usurped by the king's brother-in-law, Kichaka. Because when Kichaka is sexually harassing Draupadi, and at the point of raping her, and she threatens Kichaka that if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to go to the king, Kichaka just laughs. He just laughs and says, the king's afraid of me. I'm the one who rules this kingdom. In fact, so powerful is Kichaka, who's an Asura, by the way, so powerful is Kichaka, and that even when Bhima just sort of pounds him into a medicine ball, when Bhima kills Kichaka, and then you have his followers, and they're going to put Kichaka in the fire, and there's this understanding that if a woman enters the fire, at the funeral pyre of a man, she goes to that man. That's what Madri did with Pandu. So the Kichaka's followers say they're very angry at Draupadi because they see Draupadi is causing the death of their master. So they say, since our master died desiring this Sairandri, sort of like this, she disguised herself as like this hairdresser, Sairandri, that let's throw her into the fire. We're going to throw Sairandri into the fire so she can go to Kichaka, and Kichaka can satisfy his desires. So at that point, Draupadi, of course, is absolutely, Draupadi is just completely panicked. And so she runs to the king, and the king is again afraid to intervene. Not only is Virat afraid of Kichaka, he's even afraid of Kichaka's followers. So what's really going on in Virat? What's really going on, if you just put all the puzzle pieces together, is that number one, the Pandavas go to a kingdom that was founded by an intimate relative. Founded by, because Satyavati is like the queen mother. She's still there. Satyavati is still there. And she's like the queen mother. And she obviously has to protect the Pandavas, and her twin brother, with whom she's obviously very intimate, her twin brother founded that kingdom. Not only that, even if her brother's not alive, he obviously left instructions to be kind to the Pandavas. Not only that, you have a situation where Virat, who is a friend of Pandu, you also have to look at the relationship between Virat and Pandu, because they're the good guys. They're the Vaishnavas. Virat and Pandu were friends. And Virat has lost his kingdom. And Virat knows the Pandavas. He knows them. First of all, they're his relatives, because Virat's father probably is the twin brother of Satyavati. Virat was friends with Pandu. Virat came to the Rajasuya sacrifice. It's all intimate family. They all know each other. And even if you look at the scenes where, where the Pandavas go one by one from the eldest, and then finally Draupadi to ask employment of the king, it's obvious if you read it carefully that he actually knows them. Because in every case, when they say like, hi, I'm whoever Yudhishthira says I'm this or that person, the first thing that Virat says to every one of them is, that, no, you're not. That's not really who you are. And then they say, so he tells them, he knows that they're not who they say they are. And so in my view, Virat protected the Pandavas because they were family. And in return, the Pandavas promised that they would get rid of Kichaka and restore Virat to his throne. So again, what I'm trying to do is look at all these fragments, and like Madhvacharya says, we don't have the original version, although basically it's true. And I'm trying to take all the information I could find here and there and reconstruct what actually happened. So anyway, more to come. So we are missing our Guru Maharaj. Last question. Similarly, how do you cope missing Srila Prabhupada? How do you feel you were not missing him even after 5 decades? From Raman Reti. The day that I learned that Prabhupada had left this world, I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It was a rainy day. It was kind of a gloomy day anyway. And I went back to the temple after learning that. And I of course, called all the devotees, explained. And then I just basically went to the airport and took the next flight to India for all the ceremonies. And I remember on the way to the airport, I remember very clearly, it was sort of a gloomy, drizzly day. No, it was a normal day in Sao Paulo. And I was remembering the verse in the Bhagavatam where the earth is lamenting because Krishna has gone. She's lamenting. She's lamenting for the earth, and Dharma laments for the earth. And so I was lamenting what the earth has lost. In my relationship with Prabhupada, he emphasized to me, as he emphasized to Bhakti Charu Swami, that ultimately we serve in separate, that the Guru is present. So how did I feel? The first thing I felt was, well, Prabhupada didn't really leave. I mean, superficially he left. Prabhupada once wrote a letter that I read personally where he said, you are not seeing the actual form of the Guru. The Guru is not an external form. And Prabhupada gave the example that when there's wind and the wind blows the clouds across the moon, and it looks like the moon is sailing in the clouds. And so Prabhupada said, in the same way, you are not seeing the real movements of the Guru. So what I felt was that Prabhupada's still there. I mean, nothing serious has changed. The external form is not there, but Prabhupada is there, and my life hasn't changed. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to serve Prabhupada because he is present. He is the most important thing in my life. I mean, it's the most powerful presence in my life. It's not just the physical world, which is illusory anyway. And if you know quantum physics, like God only knows what's really out there anyway. And I thought that the reality is Prabhupada and Krishna, and they're still here, just like they always were. So it doesn't mean we don't lament. It doesn't mean we don't feel separation. But in this, Vani Vapu, I think that the followers of Bhakti Charu Swami should understand clearly that he didn't leave. And that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die. And so if someone thinks Bhakti Charu Swami is actually gone, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, you got it wrong. You just don't understand. And so I think the real devotion, of course, real devotion should be with knowledge. Prabhupada said religion and philosophy, not sentimentalism or fanaticism. So I think real bhakti toward the guru, Bhakti Charu Swami, who definitely was a great guru. The real devotion is to understand how he's present there spiritually, because he's an eternal soul. He's an eternal devotee of Krishna. And just as Krishna is always present, he's present. And of course, we miss the external form. Of course we do. But at the same time, I think the more you act as you would when he was here, the more you serve with the same enthusiasm, the same devotion, or even more devotion, that devoted service will reveal to you his presence. And so the way to be reunited with Bhakti Charu Swami, or just to, I would say, not reunited, but to strongly maintain your connection, is by devoted service. It will be revealed to you more and more how you are not separated. And so the real remedy for separation is spiritual advancement. So with your permission, I think I will take your leave. Thank you very much. It's really an honor for me, and you're just such good devotees. Bhakti Prem Swami, I owe you a visit. I recognize my debt. So, and I'll be very happy to, actually for me, that would be a great happiness to go with you to see the places of Mahabharata.
I'm thinking I am so fortunate. At least you are remembering in such a way. So I'll try to get your association.
Hare Krishna. So thank you all very much, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Thank you again. I'm very grateful you gave me this chance to remember one of the greatest Vaishnavas of ISKCON. So Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much for your wonderful association. From the bottom of our heart, we express our heartfelt gratitude to Your Holiness for enlightening us and telling so many things, especially narrating the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada and various qualities of His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Guru Maharaj. First, you quoted about this, how Srila Prabhupada told that Krishna consciousness is not a bluff. And you told the point you gave the example, the apple does not fall from the sky, and how the devotees or the followers of His Bhakti Swami Guru Maharaj are the example. They are following Guru Maharaj perfectly. You told about Guru Maharaj that how he was outstanding. He was having outstanding Vaishnava character, his scientific preaching, and he demonstrated the spiritual science by his own example. And he did what no one can do in ISKCON. He brought all of the devotees together. You told so detail about Krishna West, and told so much from the Mahabharata you're writing, and we wait for that book. And at last you told about how the guru form is not external, the real remedy for follow the Vani or for serve his instructions. So we beg for your
promise that he will come to Ujjain.
Yes.
What's that?
You have promised that he will come to Ujjain.
I did say that. Yes.
so, so we beg Your Holiness blessings to empower us and guide us so that we can follow these teachings and become loyal servant of Srila Prabhupada and continue to serve in the mission of ISKCON. Thank for accepting the proposal to visit ISKCON. Looking forward to serve you at ISKCON. Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna. Thank you all very much.
His
Hare
Holiness Hridayanand Das Goswami Maharaj ki Jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. Hare